This is Reverse Engineered.
Hey everyone, my name is Jon Penland, and Reverse Engineered is brought to you by Kinsta, a premium managed hosting provider. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Ryan Robinson, a blogger, podcaster, and recovering side project addict. Ryan, welcome to Reverse Engineered.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So Ryan, can you get us started by introducing yourself to our listeners?
Absolutely. Today, let's start with who I am today, because that's something that has grown and changed and morphed a lot over the last decade or so. Today, though, my blog teaches people how to blog, essentially, breaking it down into the main categories of writing, marketing, driving traffic, and monetizing a website. Those are kind of the big buckets that I live, breathe, and essentially just exist in. Several hundred articles on my site, a podcast that I'm working on revamping and bringing back in the coming months, which will be all dedicated to blogging.
Yeah. So again, your focus is kind of this blogging about blogging or content about blogging. But the first thing that I have to ask you about is your Twitter bio. And I referenced it at the top of the show. You refer to yourself, among other things, as a recovering side project addict. And I have to ask about that. Unpack that for me. What is a recovering side project addict?
Well, it is someone who is seeking to essentially follow my own advice. I've long since, when I was in college, I kind of got my first entrepreneurial bug working on little side businesses while I was a student, developing a product called the iStash. I think I've got one back up on my little bookshelf back here somewhere, but it was an iPhone lookalike stash device.
I have to tell our listeners there's a hilarious blog post about that they need to track down. We'll make sure and link to it in the show notes.
Yes, but the TLDR on it is that I essentially ended up learning how not to build a product-based business, and it lost me $6,500 or so, which at the time, college student, right? Very meaningful amount of money for me. Yeah. But truly ever since then, graduating college, worked in content marketing, and that's really what I did as a profession for 5 or 6 years before eventually transitioning into my blog full-time. But all throughout this journey, I constantly had different side projects, freelancing, working with friends who are more technical than I am to build little tools or other websites online. But yeah, that's really kind of the impetus of being a recovering side project addict today, is that I'm trying to be laser focused on doing just one thing, maybe two things, but doing them really well, and knowing that the journey I'm on is a long one, and I'll always have time to come back to, the ideas that spark my interest, but just being very thoughtful about not kind of diluting my effectiveness by doing too many things at once. Multitasking, I think, is kind of the downfall, at least speaking for myself. Multitasking, when I try and do that, that's when everything just suffers, versus just doing one thing really, really well.
Yeah, I found that is similar to my own story, or my own thoughts, at least, around side projects. I didn't experience the same degree, perhaps, of success with my various side projects. But when I first came to work for Kinsta, I was working in support at Kinsta. I was blogging on my own site. I was writing as a freelance writer for other clients. I had 1 or 2 clients for whom I was maintaining websites, and I was trying to find additional clients to build just simple, like business landing page style websites. And there was a period after, I don't know, really within 3 or 4 months of starting, I started to wind some of that stuff down, and I actually swore pretty much all of it off before too long. I'm curious if there was like a specific incident, situation, or if it was just a gradual realization over time that caused you to swear off sort of that side project addiction.
Honestly, it's hard, because I think, one of the most impactful things I did do was happening to find myself, let's put it that way, not necessarily super strategically making this happen, but finding myself in a career, in a job, doing content marketing for tech startups. And that right there is something that allowed me to support the growth of my blog, because a part of my day job, what I would spend 40, 50 hours a week on, was, promoting the content on a blog like Close, the sales CRM that I worked for a few years, or Creative Live, the online education company. I worked with their business classes. So all this crossover in topics that I'm personally interested in and was blogging about on my own site. I had the opportunity as my day job to go out and write guest posts and, get a publication column on sites like Forbes and such. And all this stuff kind of simultaneously benefited me alongside my day jobs. And I think that was like by far happenstance, in a way, the best thing that I found myself in. And, doing freelance projects on the side of all that too, like that kind of was my third bucket of stuff I was doing. And I think I honestly just went through enough cycles of burnout, being like, holy shit, I just can't do this. Like writing for other
Yeah.
people, writing for my job, writing for myself. Like I was just getting so tired of it all. And I also became more and more aware too of like my varying degrees of interest in, writing for my day job. Kind of have to get myself up and motivated for that because that's my steady thing. And writing for my blog was always like my kind of passion energy where I just felt drawn most. And then eventually I was like, wow, I have no energy left in the tank to do this freelance
Yeah.
stuff. And it's really hard when, especially like I was building up a decent brand for myself as a content marketer, and I would have people reach out to me wanting to book me for $5,000-$10,000 a month projects. And
Mm.
it's crazy like saying that now, turning those things down. But, it was kind of the opportunity cost. It just became too great. And so investing in my blog is something that eventually did end up paying off really, really well. And who's to say it was always going to go that way? I don't know. But I got a
Right.
combination of lucky and hard work and a lot of the right relationships kind of all fell into place that allowed me to focus on growing my own channel too.
Yeah. The way that I think about side projects today, and I'm curious if this resonates at all with you, or you're feel free to disagree as well, but like I think of them as not necessarily a positive or a negative. I think of them as something that has a place along the journey. And there are times where it makes sense, right? Like there are times where you're trying to figure out exactly what's next and how do these different pieces fit together. Maybe you're developing skills or expertise in a new area. And then there are times where it's like, all right, now I've identified my thing and I really need to drill down and focus on this thing.
Yep. I'm actually in complete agreement with you. No disagreement
Yeah.
here. I think it's side projects are great ways to test your way into something that could be your next thing. Or yeah, as you said, building a skill. I think equally as useful building relationships. Taking
Yeah.
on a freelance project with someone that you just want to become, friends with, or see the opportunity to do more hands-on work with in the future. Those are the kinds of things that I really enjoy side projects for. And I have a
Yeah.
side project today with, one of my few that I actually keep working on with my friend, Andy, who's a WordPress developer. And the reason that I have a side project with him is just because he's so good at what he does. And he's so skilled at helping me with anything technical on my blog behind the scenes too. And, we find this nice, like really cool harmony of working together that makes it a really enjoyable experience and worthwhile investing in. Yeah. And that
Yeah.
blog's Smart WP.
Okay. Nice. Okay. So I did want to focus in for the first part of our conversation here on your story, right? Like, how did you get into blogging, and what does that look like for you as you moved then from blogging into being a more general content marketer? And one of the first questions I had that I had written down is you're in this meta space where you're blogging about blogging, right? And I was having this like chicken and the egg question in my mind. It was like, which came first, right? The blogging or the blog, right? But I think you kind of answered that already. So did you have some expertise outside of your own initiative, of your own business that you brought to the experience of blogging about blogging? Tell us about how that happened.
Yeah, I actually have really strong feelings about this because it really turns me off when I see a new
Yeah.
website that every single article is about blogging and the person doesn't have experience blogging, right? So that
Mm.
was a big thing for me to reckon with when I started making a transition to blogging about blogging, was that
Yeah.
looking at my blog today, I think there's around 350 articles. I'd say the first 50 to 100 were much more about my adventures and side projects and freelancing. So documenting
Mm,
my experience along my journey has always been kind of the through line to my content. And the focus
mm.
on freelancing stuff, like advice for, putting together a contract, how to put together proposals, making sure you're reaching out to the right, decision maker at the company you want to work for. That really made up the bulk of my content for the first several years because it mirrored my journey figuring out this whole freelancing thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really didn't start blogging about blogging until my
Right.
site was getting 50 to 100,000 monthly readers on mostly the side hustle, but some the freelancing stuff too is kind of the majority of my like first audience. And then a lot of that audience has kind of stuck with me as I've transitioned mostly into talking about how to build your own audience, how to monetize and do more of the online business stuff.
Yeah. Earlier in our conversation, you also referenced that I think you did content marketing for other companies before you were doing your own thing. Is that true? Did you bring some content experience to that project, to your own, your own website?
Yeah, yeah. Gosh, I actually registered my blog, my domain name, back when I was in college. So credit to my this might date me, internet marketing teacher
Mm,
for having us all sit down and register a domain name first day of class. And so as a part of that class, we actually started experimenting with blogging and writing and marketing.
mm.
And there were class projects where we worked for a company and helped them with their blog and taught them like, hey, you can bring people to your website from the internet with a blog.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was instantly what I was drawn to most. And yeah, my all of my day jobs essentially before working full time for myself were in content marketing, and most of them
Working
were
content.
tech startups, kind of in like the B2B space for the most part. And yeah, like I can still trace so many of the relationships I made too from my content marketing jobs as places that I've done guest posts for, or, publication writers that I was just in contact with from a day job, eventually transitioning me into being a contributor on some of these sites. And so,
Mm.
yeah, like truly invaluable experience having a day job in essentially, my field that I wanted to work in for myself long before I made that transition.
Yeah. So how long I'm glad you mentioned the registration of the domain name in college, because as I was preparing for this conversation, I was trying to figure out like when did Ryan start blogging? And I couldn't really tell, and I looked up the registration. It said 2012, and I was like, that seems a little too far back, right? Like it seemed a little bit too far back in history for what you're doing today. So kind of
Mhm.
talk me through that process. It sounds like you're in college 2012, you're working with some other companies for a while, and then eventually you're transitioning to doing your own thing. What did that timeline look like?
Yeah, 2012 registration date, right? Now,
Yeah.
my blog at the time, oh my God, it was a Tumblr blog, I think, first. And so
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
it's had a few different reincarnations throughout the years, but the day that I think of as kind of the rebirth would be somewhere in January of 2014 was when I
Okay.
finally got like WordPress installed and figured out these things called WordPress themes. Like, to me, this was all like a foreign language as a writer, a marketer first, teaching myself more of the visual page building aspects of bringing a WordPress powered site to life. And yeah, 2014 was when I began like really getting more firmly entrenched in content marketing jobs, and also as an
Mm,
extension of that, taking my blog more seriously too. So that's when I think my first post was actually about the iStash. I want to say like one of my very first blog
yeah.
posts. Yeah.
So when was the point where you're working for other companies doing content marketing, and you realize I can actually do my own thing and make money doing this myself? When does that happen? When do you kind of reach that tipping point where you go, this is no longer just a website that I use to market myself to get a job. This can become my job. When did that happen?
I'm glad you mentioned what you just said because it was at first a website that I used to market myself to get better full-time jobs. And I
Yeah.
think it was a really organic progression where I was essentially using my blog to document my processes, my lessons learned, and to also kind of publish content that I was personally interested in writing about
Mm,
and could serve, thinking in the back of my mind, could serve as kind of like case studies for what I can do for other companies. And, at first I was thinking about it through the lens of, all right, how do I get, better job, better job, better job, better job, living in San Francisco,
mm,
like kind of the rat race sort of lifestyle there. And companies began reaching out to me once I was getting a decent number of readers to do freelance projects for them. And that was a
mm,
little bit of a light bulb moment where I had that kind of inbound outreach coming to me first. And I thought, oh my gosh, yeah, of course I want to take some extra side gigs on, earn a little bit more, pad my savings,
mm,
do things like that. And yeah, I think freelance clients were really kind of the first switch that flipped. And I began, I published a long form page on my site that ranks, maybe even still, I think it ranks really well for, like, if you Google search freelance content marketer or content marketing consultant, it should be in the first few. But I invested a lot of time and effort into getting that to rank number one in Google searches. And that alone brought me so many clients and really like qualified prospects too. So yeah, freelancing first one. And along with that wave of people reaching out about freelance projects for me to create the similar kind of content I do on my blog, but for them, I was also getting people that wanted to do sponsored content on my site and reach my, growing audience, 50,000, 100,000 monthly readers or so. And yeah, it just kind of kept progressing very organically, naturally from there. And I was learning about things like affiliate marketing and digital products, online courses, ebooks, things like that. And began, as I very slowly had limited amounts of time to experiment with this stuff, began dropping out my own products and affiliate offers and learning how to kind of curate content that's designed to convert well for affiliate offers too. That's a whole
mm.
other topic.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned their products, and I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the things that struck me is that while you may have started blogging, you have done a lot of other things. You mentioned a podcast early on. I know there's an online course, I believe, that you're involved with. So you've expanded into all these other types of content now. You're not just a blogger, you're a
Mhm.
content marketer more generally. Can you speak to that process of going from being a writer to being more generally a content marketer? What was that process like?
Oh man, I gotta give a shout out to, I believe, Derek Halpern. I first saw, now he's like kind of older school internet marketer. I think he was one of the first people I saw talking about using the 80/20 rule to content promotion. And that
Okay.
for me was something that really clicked. As someone who is also a recovering perfectionist, it would often take me too long to hit the publish button.
Mm,
And I had to really train myself to be okay with publishing what feels like a first draft on my site and making an agreement with myself. Hey, Ryan, you can come back and update this anytime. No big deal. Not millions of people are going to be seeing it the first few weeks it's live, so you can update it. And really shifting my focus to promoting my work way more than I spent on time actually creating the work. And, I still to this day go back and forth about how I feel about, spending way more time promotion than I do on creation. But I think it's a
mm,
constant balancing act where I can shift back towards what needs my attention most. But yeah, doing the things like once you hit publish, writing, 10 guest post pitches and sending them out to a bunch of different relevant websites that might take, one or two sections from this 10 steps to do XYZ article, where I can write a fresh article for them about those two little sections and, kind of just building quality links back to my own blog posts and trying to connect with other influencers in my space too, and do things like podcast episodes with them or feature them on my blog, ask them to feature me on their blog. There's a lot of kind of mutual win-win stuff I think that can go on if you reach out to people by providing some value to them first. That's been one really important through line for me too, is trying to just give a lot of goodness out to other people through my blog. And I've been able to see a lot of goodness come back to me as a result too.
yeah. Yeah. So you you write a lot of content. You spend a lot of time promoting it. I know you have an online course. So
Yeah.
today, as you think about yourself as a content marketer, what are your priorities today as a marketer, and what does the future hold for Ryan Robinson?
Well, this year at the beginning of 2021, I actually partnered with an agency, and they have essentially helped me to step out of being the blogger, the marketer, the writer, the doer of all the things, the WordPress guy. And
Mm,
now essentially I am acting as kind of an overseer editor of the content that gets published on my site. So I'm no
hmm
longer tackling first drafts. I have writers that help me after I work with them on an outline, and they put together a first draft. I do my edits, content goes live. And so that helps me kind of step out of being the person who spends tons of hours each week inside my blog. And yeah, my number one focus now these days is on things much more like doing fun podcast interviews, doing
Yeah,
videos for YouTube, working on course curriculum, and spending much more time trying to essentially better understand my people and work directly with them on ways that I can create courses, ebooks, different types of content, I guess, trying to zoom out, view it as content that helps people versus just writing blog posts that help people.
right. Hmm. Yeah, so I want to ask two follow-up questions. One has to
Mhm.
do with developing expertise in those areas. But before I come to that one, I want to ask, have you found it difficult to I mean, your website is basically your name, right? Like it's Rye
Yeah,
Rob, I think. Is that how you say it? Rye Rob, so RY Rob.
that's
And
it.
so to allow you still have ultimate control, right? You're still the editor, but
Yeah.
you've allowed others to be part of this project. Have you found that to be a difficult process?
Oh, absolutely. I struggle
Yeah.
with it all the time because coming from this place of releasing perfectionism and being okay with not everything, going exactly to a T the way that I would do it. That's honestly okay. And I'm making myself okay
Mm.
with that. It's a constant process for me, but having really good people that are managing my content and really talented writers and people that I just trust with, my baby essentially has
Yeah.
helped me a lot in that journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how you said that, but forcing myself to be all right with it, right?
Yeah. Because
Because
it's never
I have to,
easy.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the second question I wanted to ask then was about expertise and how you develop the skills to branch out into these other areas. You mentioned videos and there's an online course. How have you thought about developing sufficient expertise to put a product out that matches the quality of what you're already doing, right? You've already have an audience. You can't go out there with something that's half baked, right? It's got to be done
Yeah.
right. How have you approached that to make sure that what you put out when you're venturing into new types of content that aren't what you've already done for the last 10 years? How do you think about making sure that those are up to par with the rest of what you're doing?
Well, I think the answer actually is that the V1 does kind of suck of something like a course for me. And I'm okay with it
Yeah.
being very like stripped down and
Mm,
not the most like polished videos with captions and like flying graphics. And I
mm,
essentially try and do validation experiments with every course offering or digital product that I go into and make it like
mhm.
really force myself to make it simple. Otherwise, I'll spend like a month or two doing something. And if you emerge with that, product you spent making for a month or two and no one wants to buy it, that's a huge waste of time. So
Yeah.
I often take the approach of, sending out an email or a email campaign series to my audience and have just a landing page of this is what, this course I'm thinking of making. This is what it'll include. If you want it now, this is going to be the cheapest price you'll ever be able to get it. And if enough
Mm,
people purchase it, then I'll fully fund it and I'll do it and it'll be ready in, 60 days, let's say, arbitrary number. But
yeah.
I think it's really important, at least for me, to kind of, in a sense, bribe myself into creating these products based on people voting with their wallets. And that goes both ways. That tells me that, yes, I have a product that people are going to be excited about, but also that they see the value in it and they're voting on it, with their wallets. So Yeah, I wouldn't say that my first versions of any course product I come out with are perfect or great.
Perfect.
They're still a work in progress, honestly. Even Built to
Yeah.
Blog, which
Mm.
is like my primary flagship course right now, there's 54 lessons in there, and it's like 11 or 12 hours, I think, of total video
Mm.
content.
Yeah.
It's not all perfect. It's all, I'm
Sure.
in a constant stage of updating different sections of it too. As you guys know, the nature of WordPress changes so often. And so different things have
Yeah.
to always be updated. And same goes with SEO best practices and content writing, marketing, all this stuff. So I think striving for perfection kind of can cripple a lot of online creators versus just doing basic validation tests. And once people give you that kind of affirmation and approval that they'll buy something from you, then make your, best possible version you can do yourself. And since having this agency on board, I do have help with things like video editing and putting up the course pages and structuring curriculum and making sure there's the right checklist and the right time expectations for people based on each lesson of a course. So lots of these things that, I would have a really hard time getting fully right myself. It helps to have some good people in my corner.
Yeah. Now, I really think the idea that you presented there is powerful, though. So I want to make sure that, like, as I heard it, that our listeners hear it, and you correct it if I heard it wrong. But what I understood is that when you have a product idea, whether it's a course or whatever, that you actually validate the idea by, in some sense, selling it before you've created it. I mean, you've
Mhm.
brainstormed, you might have an outline, you have a sense for what you want to do, enough to write a landing copy at least, right?
Yeah.
So, but you haven't actually created the course yet. You validate the idea by going ahead and offering it to your audience, and then if there's sufficient uptake, you go, all right, that this is there's a market for this. This is worth investing my time in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And
Yeah.
the validation process usually starts with a long form blog post also. So I'll do like
Mm,
a blog post for my site. Today I have the benefit of a sizable engaged email list that I can send an email to
yeah.
and promote to this blog post and see like, okay, did this get, an average amount of opens and clicks, or did it get, a lot more or a lot less? And so those kinds of things will inform kind of the early stages. But then also, like if an article rises really quickly in organic search and starts to get a lot of readers to it, and maybe these people are downloading a freebie from this, let's say, like one example, I have an article about how to craft a blog business plan for your goals. And
Mm,
there's a freebie on there for a blog business plan template. And when someone downloads that template, that's a really like qualified lead for someone who
yeah.
may want some more guidance through something like a more hands-on course and putting their plan into action essentially. So trying to think very strategically through this process of content that can validate an idea, and then pre-selling an actual course or a book or something like that is really central, I think, to just making sure you're not creating a product for, your own whims and desires, but that people actually do want to pay for and see some benefit from.
Yeah. So I have two more questions that are about your story, and then I'm going to shift over and I'm going to ask you to kind of back up and take a 30,000-foot view of the content marketing space. But sticking with your story just for two last questions here. So early on, I know that you did a lot of consulting. And when I look on your website, I see brands like Adobe, Google, LinkedIn, some really impressive companies. And I'm curious, what role does freelancing or consulting play in your business today?
Ooh, today it's hard to really stick firm on this line, but today I don't take on any freelance work at all. And
Mm,
if you look at, I think that freelance content marketer landing page on my site, I think it qualifies people to reach out if they're open to a 10,000 a month minimum engagement with me. And so I still get
yeah.
people reaching out every week from that landing page. And sometimes it's harder than other times to say no to that work, but I do end up referring people around through different content marketers I know who have the
Mm.
bandwidth, so I can kind of recommend people. But yeah, today zero work as far as paid consultation stuff, but lots of those relationships I'll do collaborations with, guest posting, joint webinars, things like that.
Yeah. So if you're not taking on, $10,000 a month clients that want to do business with you, that indicates a very high degree of engagement with what you are doing. So you've been in this space for about a decade now, and I'm curious, what is it that keeps you engaged and interested in staying kind of laser focused in on this? How do you build a profitable business? How do you make money blogging online? What keeps you so focused in on that space now, nearly a decade in?
Gosh, I think number one for me is some version of selfishness. I like spending my time on my own projects. Really, truly, at the end of the day, I'm really grateful to have found this space that I can operate in which my content that I create does help people out there online who are looking to do similar things. And so, for me, finding this space of being able to work for myself, being able to write for
Hmm.
my site where I get the most positive energy out of the work I'm doing, and shooting videos here like in my office. Like I have so much fun doing this kind of
Yeah.
stuff that it just doesn't compare doing it for someone else, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So that's I want to shift now and kind of zoom way up. And we've talked a lot about your story, but I want to get your take on kind of the state of the content marketing industry in a few different directions. So before I was at Kinsta, I was right at the edge of the content marketing industry. Before Kinsta, I was a freelance writer for 2 or 3 years, and when I think back to that time, which would have been then like 8 years, 7 years ago, writing was what was most important, right? So
Mhm.
writing was where the content game was focused. It seems to me that things have changed a lot since that time, and that content has diversified into podcasts, videos, online courses, and so forth. So as I think about it now as an outsider to the industry, not having really been involved in 5 years, do you think it's harder or easier for somebody to get started in the content marketing world today than it may have been 5 or 10 years ago when maybe things were a little bit simpler?
Well, I'll agree with you, simpler in 5 or 10 years
Yeah.
ago, no doubt about that. But
Mm.
I would have a hard time saying harder or easier. I think something that's
Okay.
more important today is picking your primary traffic channel that you want to go after. And I think that
Okay.
should be informed on based on what your interests and kind of your natural skills and proclivities are. Because if you were, let's say, you were a social media manager for a day job and maybe you're really, really good at like drawing an audience from Instagram or from TikTok, like there's so many emerging platforms out there beyond just Google search or Facebook, that I think you can really win big by leaning into what your own interests and skills are towards a particular channel. But, me, someone who started almost 10 years ago, I leaned really hard into the SEO content and focusing
Mm.
on essentially Google as the lion's share of my traffic, and everything else is a nice to have. Because I was a bit more of a writer first at the start, I really worked hard on teaching myself kind of the SEO best practices and kept learning, today talking about the transition from writing being number one back then. Today it's so much more about what you're doing to promote your content. And I think
Hmm.
that's only picking up pace.
Yeah.
Google will tell you from shouting from the mountaintops that backlinks aren't the way to get your content to rank. But I'm sorry, the way that algorithms and search crawlers work is that they determine authority based on the quantity and quality of links that you have pointing to your content. And I don't know if there's going to be a day in which they figure out a different entire way to parse
Yeah.
that kind of data, but maybe that's naivete. But I think that promoting your content by doing things like guest
Hmm.
posting and having other websites you can write on and tastefully link back to your content is really still the number one way to go if you want to go after an organic search play. But yeah, there
Yeah.
are tons of other ways you can focus on driving traffic, but I think where a lot of especially newer bloggers get confused or drawn out into the weeds is by trying to do too many things at once. And I'm a big advocate of saying focus on just like seriously one traffic channel. If you're just getting started, and see if you can make it work for a couple of months and
Hmm.
maybe that's figuring out how to, go semi-viral on Pinterest or Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. There's
Right.
lots of different options on the menu these days. But I think diluting your efforts by trying to do everything is really tough. You look at people
Yeah.
who are successful at all these different traffic channels, they've been doing it for a long time, or they have a large team where people are doing different things. And so if you're a solo business, you can only do so much with your time. And finding
Mm.
that right balance too, between whether it's writing content, or if you have a podcast as your primary kind of discovery vehicle, or a YouTube channel, whatever that may be. I think balancing perfecting your craft, let me take it back, not perfecting, getting better at your craft, and working with the audience that you start to build relationships with. That's kind of where the sweet spot exists. And
Yeah.
promotion finding its way in there somehow too.
Yeah. So if I'm kind of reading between the lines there, I think you would agree then that if somebody's relatively new in the space, trying to be engaged in multiple channels is actually going to make them less effective. I mean, now maybe I don't want to be too exclusionary there. Like maybe they have a blog and maybe they have a Facebook and a Twitter or something, and I'm really dating myself by listing those three. But that's not the same as also having 17 other social media profiles and trying to also launch a podcast at the same time.
Right. That's exactly true. And yeah, sure. I think it's okay to have all those different platforms, and maybe you do
Right.
some automation on the social media stuff, and if you monitor your performance stats, maybe Twitter looks like a really good audience for you. But
Yeah.
I would listen to those types of signals that are popping up, and say, all right, if Twitter consistently, every week or two, you have a tweet that gets a lot of action, maybe you should spend more time on Twitter and
Mm.
deprioritize this other channel you're working towards.
Yeah.
So it's something that I
Yeah.
think can be very
So,
fluid.
yeah. One of the things that you hit on there, and you've actually mentioned it 2 or 3 times now, is the importance of finding the right balance between creating content and promoting that content. So I think you would agree that learning to promote your own content is a critical skill for anybody getting into content marketing. I'm curious if there are any other skills that you would say these are like essential skills for content marketers.
Man, I think, as tempting as it is to lean into all the AI writing tools and things like that, I think there's
Mm.
really no escaping the need to be at least a decent writer. And if you want to focus on like SEO traffic as your primary kind of channel, figuring out how to be a good SEO writer, because that's very different than like narrative storytelling, or press focused writing, publication style content. So there's lots of different kinds of writing out there, but finding what works for you, what kind of is interesting to you, and what your readers start to engage with is really important. But yeah, aside from that, like, I think a really common through line would be relationship building, just being a good people person in some way. And that doesn't mean being like extroverted and having to go to tons of live events all over the world, especially these days. But
Right.
finding ways to just connect with people that you resonate with. And maybe that's through Twitter DMs, or maybe you send someone an email and
Mm.
hop on Zoom calls that you just want to connect with. And maybe you find some ways to work together on promoting each other's content. Maybe you just get a friend out of it, or maybe it goes nowhere. I think that's something that I try and always create space for myself to just connect with people that I find interesting and who are doing cool things online. And oftentimes there is a collaboration that comes up somewhere along the way.
Yeah. I'm just getting really practical. What does that relationship building, connection building look like for you? Like, is that Twitter
Mm.
DMs? Is that email? Is that Zoom? Like, what does that actually look like for you?
I think that, if I'm being totally honest, the pace of it and the volume of it has slowed down a lot today. I
Mm.
don't personally enjoy being at like meetup events with tons and tons of people. Even pre-COVID times, didn't personally enjoy that all too much. So I do prefer
Mm.
kind of the one-on-one stuff. And for me, it often does look like, maybe interacting with someone on Twitter a bit and pulling that off to an email conversation. I'm actually talking with someone on Thursday this week that I've known on
Yeah.
Twitter for a couple of years and just love his content. And I sent him an email the other day. I was like, man, we've been tweeting at each other for years. We've never talked, would love to. And he has a really cool blog. His name's Nick Wagnall or Wignall, sorry. And his blog is all about kind of like the mental health aspect to being an entrepreneur. And that's something I've gotten so much more into in recent years that I just want to talk to him and kind of see if there are some ways we can collaborate more together, but mostly just, hey, this is a great person.
Yeah. Yeah. I think lots of folks who are into content marketing, and I think of myself in this group because I did this a few years ago. Yeah. The whole idea of being in a huge group with lots of people is not super appealing, pandemic or not, right? Like that's not,
That's
that's not
tough.
our preferred vehicle. We're folks who want to work from home, right? And write.
Yep.
So that's not usually a recipe for being super social in large groups.
Yeah. And I think you can also
Okay.
even just have really meaningful connections with people, whether it's just ongoing Twitter DMs or emails that go back
Sure.
and forth. And maybe you never need to hop on like a video call or phone call if that's not something you're into. But I've had lots of just great relationships with people that I like to call my internet friends. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I want to recap though the three skills that I feel like you honed in on as things that content marketers really need to
Mhm.
master, regardless of what their specific expertise is: promotion, building relationships, and you have to be a good writer. Really, kind of regardless of what type of content you're producing, being a good writer and good writer will require some further definition, but that's a critical skill as well.
Yeah. I think it's really
Okay.
important still. And, you look at what Google messages to you, or to the world rather, is that they do want their search algorithm to surface what is the best, in air quotes, content for their users.
Mm.
And, eventually maybe that does weed out people who are just gaming the SEO system in a really hardcore way. So I think there's no substitute for having at least an element of pretty good writing as the backbone to any strategy online.
Yeah. The internet has obviously changed a lot over the last 5 to 10 years while you've been in this space. As you look forward and you think about the future of your own business and efforts as a content marketer, are there any trends you're paying close attention to or tools that you're paying close attention to that you think are going to be critically important in the future?
Yes. I think number one, this isn't new news by any means, but I
Yeah.
think the pace with which it's getting more important is video. I think video
Mm.
first is going to be like by far the lead in the future. And I'm trying to really, really make more time for myself to do at least a couple of videos a week for my YouTube channel. I'd like to just continue picking up the pace with that because I think that's the muscle I want to build more right now at this point in my career than writing. I feel like my writing
Mm.
has gotten to a good enough place that I'd like to now master video and build up an audience on platforms like YouTube, but also, publishing stuff on my own site. And that's really huge. And I think, this gets pretty into the weeds, but I think there's something magical between the connection of having a long form article on your blog that is paired with a video on the same topic embedded into your blog from YouTube. I think there's some
Yeah.
magic that Google really likes about that, seeing like embedded YouTube videos that are
Mm.
topically very relevant to the written content on a page. I think they like really, really like to reward that. So I'm seeing really good results right now with both getting more views naturally on YouTube for my videos and also seeing posts rise quicker in organic search rankings because, well, can't necessarily say because I'm doing all these other things to promote my work too, but I think it has been helping to also have an embedded YouTube video with most of my posts that go up.
Yeah, I can't speak to the combination of writing and of written content with embedded video. I'm not deep enough in the weeds with our marketing team to know whether or not that's been critical for us. But I can echo that at Kinsta, our video game, we've stepped that way up in 2021. We've gone from having virtually a non-existent YouTube presence to trying to put out 5 videos a week, right? So
Yeah.
it's similarly viewing it as I'm trying to remember the number. I think YouTube, if you rank it as its own search engine, is like the second largest search
Yeah.
engine in the world,
Number
something like
two.
that, right? So yeah,
Can't
it's
sleep
pretty
on it.
critical, right? I'm sure you get folks on social media or in your life in general asking for advice as they're trying to get started in content marketing. So
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you here as well. Like when somebody asks you that question, they want to get started in content marketing. What's your advice to somebody who's trying to get started in that space?
I do think, especially if it's going to be a brand new space for you, I do think having a day job or at least having freelance work where you're being paid to learn is by far the best way to do it. That's what has
Mm,
worked really well for me. That way you're building up skills as you're getting paid to learn it. And, if you don't find yourself interested in getting a day job or taking on freelance work, do it for yourself. Start learning, putting into practice some of the learnings that you can read about out there. I mean, there's great content on how to perfect your writing craft, how to do marketing strategies. Like
mhm.
there's no shortage of content that's instructional and very useful, but I think you'll always learn the most by just putting into practice on your own blog, let's say. I think that's by far the best way to get real experience, and having a blog can get you jobs. It can get you freelance gigs. It can
Yeah,
grow into your own business one day if you want it to also. So yeah, I mean, that's very, very heavily reliant upon my own experience of this journey,
sure.
but I
Yeah.
do see many people I know also kind of having a similar trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think virtually anybody that I'm aware of in the content marketing space, even if they're working for other companies, has their own website and has their own blog. I mean, I
Yeah,
think
pretty much
setting
all.
aside whether it's, yeah, setting aside whether or not it's necessary for your resume, just having that sort of proving ground where you have a place where you can put content out, get feedback from people you don't know, and that sort of thing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Ryan, as our conversation moves to a close, I have two wrap up questions for you.
Mhm.
So, the first is, what is a resource you would recommend to the listeners of Reverse Engineer? This could be a book, a blog, an online course, a newsletter, really anything. So, what's one thing our listeners should check out?
I would recommend, I mentioned it earlier, my most popular downloadable resource is my blog business plan template.
Okay,
And it's
awesome.
very extensive. There's a share or a downloadable Google Doc. You can do lots of different kind of activities that'll help you set the right kinds of goals, help you lean into what's going to be, maybe your traffic channel based on what your natural proclivities are. And yeah, I'd say if that is at all of interest, then that's one of my best resources.
Awesome. So the blog business plan. So we'll make sure and get that
Mhm.
in the show notes for listeners who are interested in checking that out. And our final wrap up question: where can our listeners go to learn more about you or to connect with you?
My home base is ryrob.com, RYROB, my nickname. But yeah, I'm most active on Twitter too. That's where I probably talk with people the most. But yeah, email inbox is always open as well. It's just ryan@ryrob.com.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today on Reverse Engineered.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And thank you to our listeners. That's all for today's podcast. You can access the episode show notes at kinsta.com/podcast. That's KINSTA.com/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Reverse Engineered and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or the platform you're listening on right now. See you next time.